morning with Viewpoint. Once again, must be Wednesday, up here on Lazy Road, County Road 2250. Program Politicians, Personalities, and Perspectives.
We got a personality to talk about a politician.
Well, I think we kind of covered all three bases here when it's all said and done. We're going to get right down to bringing our guest, stranger. So I'm glad he was able to find his way up here and all. Kudos. The old feller appeared before the Beta Sigma Pi, say it right, Bill, sorority the other evening, and I gave the folks a little program on the honor flight. They were happy to know more about that, and they were so happy that the old guy walked out of there with a $100 check for the honor flight.
Oh my gracious!
So
how good
thank
for you.
Thank you, Beta Sigma Pi, very, very much. That is much appreciated. And in that vein, you'll recall that a few weeks ago, the Mike Fack was instrumental in getting this breakfast out at the Legion and raised a significant amount of money. And in that, a couple of organizations kicked in. As a result, Mike had some checks worth $5,400 for the honor flight.
No kidding.
Yes, that's pretty significant. It's coming out of Oakland County here. Much appreciated, folks. Those of us who have appreciated being a part of the honor flight, really thank you very much for that. Post office performed as well. He sent that registered with no signature required, and about 30 days later it came back it couldn't be delivered. So I had the check to take down to the honor flight, folks. So that, my $100 that I got from the Beta Sigma Pi folks, so $5,500. That's a big deal. So thank you very, very much. I also, kudos also. I note that the 4-H organizations here in Lincoln Logan are having an oral communications contest. What a great thing to teach kids.
Do kids know oral or just text?
Well, yeah. I don't know whether they're going to do that with their little thumbs working on the keyboards or not, but which is a very important point, by the way. But that's really neat. Not every kid can participate in basketball, football, and track, and those who are exposed to this type of training will carry that with them the rest of their lives. So congratulations and kudos to those folks who organized that. Oh.
Did I ever tell you what my mom said to me?
I know you've told me your daddy said many times.
Yeah, he was...
He was a jewel.
He was a jewel. My mom, the first time I ever had to speak out loud to more than one person at a time was when I was in high school. And we had a big school, and I was so nervous. I was just scared to death. And my mother said, "Of course you are. It's because you're conceited." She said, "You think the people are listening to you and looking at you, and they aren't. They're wondering what they should say and wondering who's looking at them." And I thought, by George, I think she's got it.
Yes, that's right. As the old saying says, by Jove, I think she got it. My fair lady,
there are things you don't mind being, but conceited isn't in that list, right?
You can't even spell conceited, and you're not with your psyche and your makeup. There's no question about that. Special announcement. In the interest of transparency. You know, we had a national figure talk about transparency. He hadn't done a very good job of fulfilling that talk, and I'm not sure he can spell transparency. But nonetheless, in the interest of transparency, I should tell you, folks who are planning to go over, and you should be planning to go over to the Arley Theater on Friday, April 25th, the Count Basie Band is going to be there. Great opportunity to see some great music. But in the interest of transparency, I need to tell you that that's not the original band members that will be there.
Well, the Count, I think, had another engagement.
Well, they're out in the desert playing for Mel Brooks. But seriously, that's a nice event, and it's an opportunity to see a part of the musical past, an era of times when music was music, and so I'd urge folks who might not have too much to do on Friday, April 25th, to go to the Arley Theater. Tickets are only $35, which is not a lot of money. So, in any event, that's my talk on transparency.
Hey, one more little thing about music.
Yes.
I hope I'm not doing the wrong thing here. At any rate, there's going to be a Logan County Music Festival, and it's going to be at Lincoln Junior High School, and it's going to include all the schools.
Yes.
And the youngsters will be playing, and check it out, because that would be a nice thing.
That's this Thursday
the
night,
kids
is
do
it
a
not?
beautiful job.
Is it this Thursday night? Yes.
This
Okay,
Thursday
thank
night.
you, Jim.
The doors will open at 6:15, and the program begins at 6:30, and it's quite affordable. It's $2 a piece unless you're young or old, and then it's free. We would not be in the young category, Bill.
Oh.
We must be the old people.
Yeah. Well, that's nice to know about that.
It's
No,
nice
seriously.
to know something nice about
matter of
being
fact,
old.
I'm going to go to the church.
It'll be
supper
over
that night.
260 students. Now, that's a bunch.
So,
That's
show up there,
great.
folks, at the Lincoln Junior High auditorium. That'd be a nice evening, particularly going into the fact that we're going into Easter. My gosh, next week, Easter week, isn't it? All right. Why don't we get on to business and introduce
No,
this
I
stranger?
don't think so.
No?
No,
The next
you've got
one?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Oh, yeah. Well,
Oh, dear, you scared
old
me.
fella's confused again.
You scared me. So, would you like me to introduce Paul?
Well, yeah, because he's not very well known around here.
Yeah. Paul Beaver, Lincoln Scholar Exceptional, has told me, and I thought this was so interesting, that they're in the process of building a train that will be a replication of the funeral train that brought Lincoln back to Springfield. And it will follow that route, which includes the beautiful city of Lincoln. And a friend asked me yesterday who was going to be our guest today on Viewpoint, and I told her about Paul Beaver and talking about this train. And nobody in the room knew about this train business. And I think it must be something that we're not being very transparent about. So, Paul, tell us the story, please, and thank you.
Well, I understand they've run into some glitches along the way, too. On the train, I talked to Ann Mosley, who's Ron Keller's assistant.
Yes.
And she's on that commission, and she said that they're running into the problem of they wanted to bring it all the way on the route, the replica train. The man's built the cars and the engine and everything. But, of course, if you build the original train, the tracks would have to all be adjusted for several hundred miles.
The gauge
is different.
Yeah.
And that Amtrak, the latest thing that I've heard, and I guess so much of this is in flux, is that they may not be able to do it, so they may have to transport it.
Oh, shoot.
And then, so we may not get to see it come through our fair city after all.
Wouldn't it be
other
better?
than maybe on flat cars or something.
Wouldn't it be better to fudge in that one area and make the wheels adapt to the tracks? No way is anybody going to make the tracks adapt to the wheels.
I'm sure, and I had, again, chance, I was going to try to talk to Ann, but they're a little busy getting the museum rate open.
Right.
Yeah.
But that, I think, could be handled. I guess it's just a matter, when you think about our tracks up here, how much they're being used and all over the country, that they couldn't, the problem would be clearing the train. It would be, I guess, a problem. So it's kind of in flux. The train has been built, or is being built, so that will be there. Now, whether or not we'll have to just go to Springfield to see it, and you know how I am about that.
Yeah, you tickled Jim saying that.
I'm a Lincoln fan.
Well, the other thing...
But I mean, it is having, it's in flux. Now, we're going to have a Lincoln train.
Yeah.
Just exactly how and where we'll get to see it, and that I know they want to do it, of course, on the exact week that his body was brought back.
Wouldn't that be something? Paul, there's a significant amount of money involved here. Whence cometh the money for them to have built this replica?
Well,
private donations?
Private, mostly. I
Isn't
don't
that
think
interesting?
the government's kicked in on. They'll, of course, all be there and publicly puff
Tipping
out
your
chest
hats.
wherever the train goes through, but it's all been a private situation. You know that when you think back at that time, it was just incredible. I mean, of course, Walt Whitman's famous poem, Lilacs, which when I first read it, I thought, where wrote this thing? About lilacs and so on. But that train traveled across the country, and people lined up every place. And
regardless
did it
of the hour that it came through their town.
Right, and did it. And I guess one of my first interests in it, when I was a little kid, my aunts and uncles and some of those always would tell me about my great-grandfather, and of course the fact that he had become a Republican in those turbulent years, living west of town, while his brother, also living west of town, was a staunch Douglas Democrat, which created some problems, as you can imagine. But my family told me that the day the train came through Lincoln, Grandpa and Grandma, who was very pregnant with my grandfather, brought the wagon in from out there at Rocky Ford in that area, and came to the tracks, I suppose about where Madigan Park would be today, along with many other farm families. And this was not just in our county; they did this everywhere. And then most of them took their hats off, said a prayer. Well, when you're a little kid, that doesn't mean too much, and you got older, you wish you'd listen a little better.
Oh yeah.
But they did that all across the country.
Yes, that's amazing to think that as the train made its way back to Springfield, that you had people out in rural areas, standing along the tracks outside, and for instance, right up here in Atlanta or up the way to McLean, just come out and stand from an open field.
8 miles from our old farm to the tracks. I don't know I'm not much of a horseman, but it would take them a couple hours, wouldn't it, in a wagon, and load it up to go that distance over those roads in the spring. So you had to get up. The train was back coming through Lincoln around dawn, 7 or so. So you had to been up pretty early and hitched up Barney and Bill and
Topsy and
other
Judy.
People were doing it all over the county.
Yeah. You mentioned, digressing just a minute, mentioned the depot. I'm just delighted as an old-timer to see that we're going to be able to get control of that for the city, not from taxpayer money, folks, perhaps a little bit, but the fact that they're going to be able to get those cars off there and put it back to its original footprint and kind of restore it like the old, if you'll recall, just to the north side of that was the old Railway Express part. That was that square brick part, right? And then it was attached by a roof, and there was a breezeway, so-called, between that and the depot. And apparently that's the idea is to restore that to its original configuration. That's a great thing.
Well, I've always believed, and you've heard me say it, that the depot was the linchpin of downtown Lincoln, and will be so again. I've talked to Bill Hoagland, and I said, what I really would like to see at Christmas was the depot with a tree in the window and lights around the edge of it. So when people come into our town, what a pleasant sight they would see. And it looks like that's going to be a possibility. And I'm like you, Bill. I think this could be a major step in our revitalization of downtown, because I understand they maybe want to put some of our offices in there, and all of that would light it up and sell tickets. Just to be able to go in and get a ticket would be nice.
It reminds me of Bob Sullivan's dad, Floyd, when he's a ticket manager. I'd walk in there.
Bob to do it.
I'd walk in there and he said, "Where you going, kid?" That would be, and he get to. Well, now back to the Lincoln train. I didn't want to get too far off that track. That was bad. That was bad. That was really terrible pun. Sorry about that. I apologize. We need to bring Mr. Lincoln back through Lincoln and going to Springfield. That the train is going to, the source of it is going to emanate from Washington.
Well, that was the plan originally, and as I said, it's changed, and I haven't been able to get all the updates. I'm sorry about that, but that they were hoping that they could just start out, but I guess the rerouting got to be. You think about that, coming across the country with a train traveling
Not very
35,
fast.
40 miles an hour
Yeah.
at most.
Yeah.
35, maybe.
Let's have some
I
track.
think that's about what they traveled in Lincoln's day. 30, 30, they thought they were really moving out at
Yeah.
35.
Well, compared to your horse and
Yeah.
buggy, I suppose they were.
So when you got an Amtrak coming through up there at Dwight at 90 or whatever it came through, some problems.
And they've got all across the country. They have freight cars that are on schedule, stuff that has to be delivered. So logistically, it's going to be quite a thing to
right,
work
and
that all out.
That's why I think we might end up seeing it transported, come part of the way on rails and transported. And
Well,
I don't care, just so in the end they have that train end up in Springfield, because that would be quite a scene.
If, when, and how it does, is it a plan that the car itself would be open and people could go through it, or is it not going to be complete on the inside, just the exterior?
Well, I think it wasn't that fancy on the inside, as you know. I mean, it was just a car that Pullman car, by the way, lasted a long time, and then it burned up in a grass fire in Wisconsin.
Think of that.
The
Yeah.
original car.
Huh.
The original.
But and it's also the stopping. The train stopped. Ron said they found some evidence that the train maybe stopped in Atlanta. Actually stopped. And we didn't know that. We've never been told that. We've always been told that it stopped in Bloomington and then stopped in Springfield, but it didn't stop in Atlanta and Lincoln and
So
Elkhart. But evidently it did stop in Atlanta for a little bit. And of course, they had quite a ceremony up here. They had the arch across the tracks, and Lincoln had a lot of friends in Atlanta, as we know, the Hoblets and others that are better known. But he had a lot of them, the everyday families that he knew. And I think one of the things we forget is this was a funeral. I mean, it was a funeral car and
It was a
funeral
cortege,
train.
so to
And
speak.
people just like wanting to go pay their respects at the funeral home. This is what they had this great feeling that they needed to do this. And how do you do it? Well, most of the places had the church choirs came out, and different ones, and sang different hymns that would have been sung at funerals. And a lot of prayers were said, but I was interested to find that they seemed to think that maybe it did stop in Atlanta. No, it didn't stop very long, because and Lincoln, it rolled through just very slowly. But you couldn't get on the car, and you couldn't go past the casket.
No.
And they were going to Springfield, and of course they put it in what we call the old state capitol, and
By the way, I note,
mobs of people went by that.
I just noted that they completed renovations on the tomb. Are you aware of that? And
I
can
know
you
they've
speak to
been
that
working, yeah.
at all? What they've done in there? They've just had maybe do some things that needed to be done physically.
Yeah. Well, and of course, that tomb kind of is an outgrowth of the attempt to steal Lincoln's
Yes.
body in the 70s, and two groups tried it. The Logan County group failed miserably, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, they-
So there were some names there that I'm glad faded into obscurity.
Yeah.
But they didn't get it done, and then the Chicago bunch, real thugs, actually got the casket moved a little bit, and then they broke it up, and they've been tipped off. The Lincoln group, I shouldn't say that, the Logan County group had tipped off all of the ladies of the night in Springfield, and they went right to the police, so that took care of that plot. But
Loose lips
Be
sink
careful.
ships.
That's right. Yes,
so
there you
this
go.
next bunch was a little tougher bunch.
Now,
Yeah,
Paul,
but they didn't get it done. But that's when Robert Lincoln's we're enough of this.
yeah.
We're not having this, and that's when they decided on the I don't know how many feet of concrete are over that, but it's a lot.
Tell me, Paul, you're a great Lincoln historian. Born, raised right here in Lincoln land, Lincoln Gore. How many times have you been to Lincoln's tomb?
20, 25 maybe. I don't know.
Really?
Used to
Well,
take
the
students
reason
down.
I asked that question is I've been there twice.
Mm.
Once when I was a Boy Scout, obligatory trip for the Boy Scouts to make, you know. And several years ago, I went through the Grand Canyon, and one of my canyon adventurers was a young man, a Japanese boy, and he was over here on a Fulbright. And the bottom line is that I asked him to come spend the holidays with us because he was alone in this country. So he came for Christmas and so on. And two stories about that. Anyway, I took him down. That's the second time I've ever been there. I took him down because I wanted him to see the Lincoln Tomb. And so that was I thought that's interesting. Here I am 35 miles or less from it, and I've only been there twice. The other thing about having Yaz in the house, I took him to church, and I told him to pass a plate for the collection, and I leaned over and explained that to him, how it was. I said a lot of people sign pledges for the year and so forth. And so in his open way, he says, how much you give? And I told him, neither ashamed nor proud of what we were giving at the time. And he says, it was not much. And I told that to Father Bill Turner. He says, always remember that every year is not much, Bill.
Well, you know, the of course, working in the Lincoln Field, different groups that took them through, and one of the things I thought about the Lincoln Tomb, it's not a morbid. It's not like having to go to King Tut's tomb somewhere in the desert or something. It's a kind of an open, as you well know, area, nice, and with the flowers around the vault and everything. And of course Mary's there. They're all there but Robert. And they brought Willie's body back from Washington. And see, they lost Eddie. In fact, lost him, I think, the year Lincoln was founded, in 53. Can't remember exactly. He was born then or lost. I've lost my track of that. They lost little Eddie, and then of course Willie died in the White House, and that's what undid Mary.
Mary, yeah, right.
I mean, she's hardly saw her husband.
Yeah, from that point for a time.
And it just undid her. And he really did take her to the window and looked out, of course, what we called an insane asylum, and said, Mother, you've got to get straightened around, basically, or you're going to end up over here.
We're going to be undid here, Judith, Kay, and Paul, if we don't take a couple of minutes to recognize our sponsors. Then we're going to come back right and talk with Paul Beaver about Mr. Lincoln. Right back live in the studios with Viewpoint this morning. Mrs. Busby and old fella have as our guest Mr. Paul Beaver. We're discussing the replica, the recreation of the Lincoln funeral train, which may or may not get through Lincoln according to some of the logistics involved here. It'll definitely get to Springfield one way or the other.
Well, and we've got another year to work out a lot of these things, and I just was thinking, I said to Judy when we came in, this is quite an interesting anniversary today. If you live in the South, it's also a funeral because this is the day Robert E. Lee surrendered at...
today? Is that right, this very day?
Appomattox.
Uh-huh.
And Judy and I, being Presbyterians, there's quite a story about that. John Brown Gordon was a very famous Confederate general, and at the end of the war was with Lee at Appomattox because a lot of them had been killed or wounded. He had been seriously wounded in the face and lived through it. But at Appomattox, Lee was trying to get South to join up with Joe Johnson, so they put the two armies together. They really, you look back from afar, and Bill, about military, it'd make any difference if the two of them got together. That had just been more killing.
Yeah, that's right.
But he was trying to go through Virginia and then turn south to hook up. And the morning, Grant had sent him a letter to ask him to surrender, and he said he wasn't ready. And then the morning, it was either the night before or the morning, I don't remember. I think it was the morning of. He sent John Brown Gordon out and said, see if you can find a way to break through the Union lines because they're surrounding us. General Sheridan, who we've got Sheridan
Phil.
Street,
Yeah.
and my grandfather, of course, was named for General Sherman, and as a lot of kids were in those days. But Brown took the troops out, and they broke out a little bit, and then he looked up, and there was a whole army coming at him. They had a whole army of the James, and he knew this thing was over. And he sent a note back to Lee, and he said, "Unless Longstreet can reinforce me,
We're done."
Well, that's like saying Longstreet's got no chance to do that. So Brown is the one that, John Brown is the one that let Lee know this thing is over. And then Lee said, well, I got no other thing to do except go see Grant. Put on his full uniform because he thought he'd become a prisoner of war.
Yes.
And then saw Grant, the whole story then in the McLean house, and they surrendered. And Grant probably did as much to keep our country out of a terrible, bitter, hill-fighting guerrilla war than anybody when he said, troops go home. And they put the guns down and they can go home, and we're not going to bother them. And of course that included Lee, so that took away all the guys that wanted to hang Lee. And it really was, Grant did I don't know what would happen if we'd have fought in the hills for another 20, 30 years. Well, you've seen it over in Asia when this has happened. But anyway, then many years later, 30-some years later, right after our church was built, Judy, the pastor, Reverend Timmons, who was from Tennessee and who had been a Confederate officer, who's now the Presbyterian minister. I've never figured out how that all worked. There's no letters or anything. How you suddenly got a ex-Confederate officer as your pastor. And I'm sure he's the one that engineered Gordon coming up. And of course, Governor Oglesby had lived in Ladino. I'm not sure whether he was living in Lincoln at that time or in Elkhart, but nevertheless was here and well known by everybody. And so he was put in charge of the program, and Brown came, and they packed the church that night with Union veterans, and every time Brown would talk about some general they liked, they'd all jump up, and it must have been quite a night. But it was a reconciliation evening.
Paul, I want to ask you something.
So, I mean, it really strange how these things worked out.
At what age in school, what grade in school were you when you realized that you had a definitive interest in this time in history in our country? You must have had an excellent history teacher somewhere along the line to pique that interest.
Lincoln College.
Is that where you...
Mrs. Bailoff.
Annalee
She was
Bailoff.
incredible.
One of
She
the best
was
instructors
incredible.
ever appeared on that hill, I can tell you.
And she really probably did more than I had a good history teacher in high school, and Mr. Kafka, Joe Kafka, I had him in the 8th grade. But when I got to Mrs. Bailoff, I still remember that first day, and it was European history. The book was about 7 inches thick, I thought. And she said, and for Friday, 3 days a week, and for Friday we'll do chapter 6. And I looked, my God, that's more pages than I've read in a year. I had to read that in a day.
She could make history come alive.
But she did, and really, that's when I really got it. I think that more than teachers were my aunts and my great aunts who were talking about these people because they were real people to them.
Sure.
And they would say this happened or that happened. And I regret, as a real little guy, a couple ex-Confederate soldiers, I guess, wandered by the farm. Well, if they didn't play baseball, I wasn't interested. So it shows you how stupid you can be at that age. But I think it was also blessed with a pretty good memory, and that's also helped a lot.
What did he just say?
Well, I get into the senior moments with the best of them now with names.
Well, we mentioned.
But I can remember some king of England in 1360 easier than I can remember somebody I met on the street.
I understand that.
But it's just always had that, and I'll tell you what, growing up in Lincoln, it was always around you. E.H.
Yes.
Lukenbill. It was my job at Mill Grove Gauge School when he showed up to get him talking about Lincoln, so we didn't have anything to do the rest of the day. That was my job. But he, look how he was. You had Judge Stringer, who I
Sure.
didn't know, but Jim Hickey did.
D.F.
Then I
Nichols.
taught in Elkhart, and who do I meet? There's Jim Hickey and his daughters in class, and Betty. So I was very fortunate. Dr. Dooley at Lincoln College, I had him, and so I was fortunate to be around the people who knew.
And
But
speaking of Anna Lee Bailoff and Dr. Raymond Dooley, which brings us back to Lincoln College, at the end of this month, we're going to finally get to open up our delightful, very, very marvelous museum. And you've had a chance to kind of sashay through there and get a little pre-exposure to it. Your comments, please, sir.
Well, it's pretty incredible. I think people are going to be amazed what we have here, and they've got. What's nice about it, their exhibits are set up so they can rotate things.
Yes.
There's some things that aren't out now, and I ask about them immediately, and they said, well, they'll come in on the rotation. So that's good, because it'll never always be just the same. It'll change, but they did a beautiful job with the exhibits.
Oh, they did an
Paul, you've
excellent-
always said that there was a wealth of memorabilia that couldn't be seen by the public because there wasn't room to
Right.
show it.
Right.
So this is going to be a big help for that problem, isn't it?
I think really, and I told Ron Keller this, I think our museum here does a better job of teaching Lincoln's life than the big one does in Springfield. And my thought down there is that they spend way too much room and time on the funeral. That's at the end. They didn't. What did Lincoln do for making a living? He's a lawyer, right? When you go to the state museums, or the
Surveyor first, and a lawyer.
surveyor, but when you go down there, how much is devoted to Lincoln's law practice at the big, beautiful museum in Springfield? One little room, one little display, with his two boys throwing inkwells at each other. That tells me about his law practice. Guy Fraker, when he wrote his book, which is terrific, said, "You want to know how Lincoln got to be president? Because he went around here. He was a lawyer who went on the circuit, and at night he gave the talk, and ordinary people listened to him. Lincoln went on this circuit. I didn't realize Central Illinois had more people than the Chicago area. And we had a lot of people, and they all came out of Ohio, and they all came out of the, well, because where Great Granddad came out of Ohio, and they were here. We had lots of people. And this is where Lincoln built his base. He didn't build it on some, today they try to say, well, it was some obscure little group of farm people or something. No. These were lawyers, doctors.
Pretty substantial people.
These were the people that then later went on and made Kansas and Nebraska and California, but they were here in the 1850s. And, when you deal with that, and he was really a fine lawyer. He did the F.A. Afton case, the steamboat case over on the bridge at Rock Island, where the steamboats wanted that bridge torn down and was taking the trains over the Mississippi. He worked some big cases, and he was an excellent lawyer. And I just thought and I know a lot of my historian friends that thought they really shortchanged his whole law practice when they built that. The showing the two kids in the office, so and it goes, yeah, they did do that, and they drove William Herndon crazy. But that doesn't tell his story. That doesn't tell the story of the gal up at Metamora, who he was defending. You've heard that story.
No, tell
At
me.
Metamora, where he was defending this lady, and she'd killed her husband. And the husband had abused her for years, but that didn't matter. The laws of Illinois still were on his side. The fact that he had beaten her and she finally killed him. And so they're having a lawsuit. And the lawyers and the judges all realized that the laws should have been changed.
Yeah,
but,
not
they
equitable,
weren't
but-
changed.
Yeah.
And so Lincoln was talking to her downstairs, and it didn't look very good. And she said, I wonder where I could go get a glass of water. And he said, I heard they got really good water in Tennessee. Whereupon she left.
Yeah.
But the point is, nobody ran her down like and later on, when Lincoln was running, I think it was against Douglas, I guess, in that race, the prosecutor said, well, you ran off my, And Lincoln said, well, all I told her was that they had good water in Tennessee. Now, they both understood. You realize that this had been
Well,
some
no, that's
common
subtle.
thief they'd have chased
Yeah.
down, but not going to happen. And the fact that Lincoln realized the laws were, and so did the prosecutor, that they were wrong. But he was, I think we do a better job in our museum of that, of talking about
the
law cases.
opening and upstairs where they have the holograms and so, and the items which you can touch and thereby activate the display. That's remarkable.
Yes, it
and
is.
that opening hologram, wherein you see them at the box at Ford Theater,
Right.
and all of a sudden here John Wilkes Booth appears out of nowhere and shoots the president. And then he jumps up on the edge of the rail as the legend went to jump down on the stage. That's remarkable. It gets your attention. You just stand
Yes, it
there
does.
transfixed while you're watching that thing. So the folks who are going to have not seen it before, they're going to be in. There will be in for a real surprise, and it's going to be a very enjoyable experience. I was amazed to know that's going to take over an hour to go through that second floor production.
Yeah, Ron and I had a little talk about that the other day, and said that having taught junior high before I came to Lincoln, I know junior high attention spans about a minute and a half, give or take. And I remember when they built the museum there in Springfield, the one exhibit where the explosion goes off.
Yeah, that gets your attention.
Well, they said
yes.
The
for,
seats shake.
for a junior high kid, you need to do something to get his attention every few minutes and get him back on. But they're just kids, But our museum, I think, is going to be easy for them to do. It's not so big. Springfield, that's a big situation.
Now, when the school closes for the summertime, is the museum going to be able to stay open?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
By the way, once again, Judith and Paul, we'll mention the docent thing. They can still use some, would be happy to have some volunteers to serve, to welcome people. You do not have to be steeped in Lincoln lore. They just need warm, congenial bodies who will welcome the visitors and shepherd them around a little bit. So anybody would, there's a lot of people, there are a lot of people who have some time, and if they had enough, we could kind of rotate it around so you wouldn't have to do it very often. So
And they don't have to be docents like the one Southern Museum. They had the one person, and they just, whatever, they made up something for different, and they thought they needed, like Dizzy Dean once said, I thought each writer needed a different story, so you don't have to do that at ours. Just look at
no, you don't, and you don't have to dress in period costume. But that's we need some help up there. So Lincoln College, 732-3155, and ask to Mr. Keller. Well, we've run the clock right up to 9 o'clock again, Mrs. Busby. We'll try to close with a saying appropriate for the hour and the subject matter. And we all remember Mr. Lincoln's famous quote about you cannot strengthen the weak by weakening the strong. And with that, we will close. Thank you very, very much.